Held it.
Okay. I thank you all for coming, the residents of Masonic Village. It's so great to see you all after 2 fantastic holidays that we had. And secondly, we are so pleased that you're back. We want you to know you're our #1 star.
Thank you.
And not only are you an author and you're a professional and you're a dad, you're a professor.
All-round great guy.
Yeah, you are. You got it all going for you. So thank you very much for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. We really look forward to you being here.
Thank you so much. That is so kind of you. It's wonderful to be back. I wasn't here last month. I do. It wasn't just you. It is the microphone, I guess.
Can I say one more thing?
Oh yeah.
Tomorrow, I'm the lady that works with T-Mobile. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock, we are having T-Mobile be here. If you have any needs with your cell phones, they'll be here from 1 to 4:30. I have 7 people signed up that are coming to get assistance or get new phones. You don't have to get a new phone. If you have a question on your phone, please come and get the services from them. They drive here so that we don't have to drive to them. Thank you.
Where?
Here.
Here.
Right in this room.
Right here. 1 o'clock. Right here. Before I get started, I want to introduce somebody. Catherine, would you please stand up? And I know that you don't want to be singled out. First of all, I think you're the youngest person in the room, so congratulations on that. I just want to say, Catherine is a really talented budding filmmaker, a videographer. She does documentary films, and she's now working for the Veterans Breakfast Club through Memorial Day, and she has been for the past couple months. It's just been wonderful to work with her. And she has a really strong Masonic Village connection because her grandmother lives here. And secondly, she is in a program called the Pittsburgh Fellows based here in Sewickley. And so she just graduated from, what the heck is wrong with this? It only likes my voice. Grove City College, and so she's at this stage where just out of college and kind of launching his career, and we're really grateful to be able to take advantage of her talent and her expertise. And so we've been working. She's been interviewing veterans. She's been coming to our Veterans Breakfast Club events, meeting a lot of veterans, and it's all because of a generous donor who lives here named Bill Romer, who made a donation to Pittsburgh Fellows to allow her to work for the Veterans Breakfast Club. So, Bill, thank you very much for bringing Catherine to us. Thank you for your role in getting Catherine on this earth. And thank you, Catherine, for coming tonight. Okay. Tonight I thought I'd do something different, and that is do a little kind of a trivia game. It's not a formal lecture. This is a kind of informal trivia game about World War II. Oh man, this is a problem. Yeah, let's try another microphone. Let's see if it'll work. Is there one up here? Maybe yeah, that's what we want.
Jim, did you turn it on? Jim, is it turned on?
How's that?
No, let me see. Hello?
Oh, there we go. Yeah, that worked.
Hello?
Yeah,
Is that working?
yeah, it did.
Hello? All right. How about now? Can you hear it? No? Now can you hear it? Yes.
I have to hold this stupid button down. Okay. All right. Yeah. I was putting this together. This is a kind of a trivia game on World War II, and thinking about why World War II, probably along with the Civil War, are just the perennial sources of interest for anybody who cares about World War II. It's just amazing. I know when we're running a Veterans Breakfast Club program, and we do a lot of history in the Veterans Breakfast Club too, whenever we do World War II, we get the most interest. We get the most readers, we get the most people online, virtually, the most people coming to a lecture. World War II has this kind of this role in our historical imagination, maybe rivaled again only by the Civil War. And I do think it's because of a few reasons. Number one, the scale of World War II was the largest single event in human history, involving in more people, more places than anything else. Nothing really close. Number two, the scope of World War II was dramatic. It affected every aspect of life, especially American life. I mean, you could not wake up and live, go to work, go to school, eat your food, go to bed without knowing that there was a war on. I mean, the war determined what you ate, where you worked, how you learned, and what news you followed every day. I mean, it just was all enveloping. It also, the other thing of World War II, the thing in the U.S. that made World War II distinctive was that it wasn't fought here. It wasn't fought in the U.S. So I think we have a fundamentally different relationship to the memory of the war than other countries do. I think we remember the war in some ways more fondly than other countries do. If you bring up the war in, say, Italy or France or Germany or just about any other belligerent country, it's immediately a downer. Like, oh boy, okay, well, you want to get into the war years? We'll talk about that. But that's not the case here. It wasn't fought here, it was fought overseas. And so I think the United States was really the one place on earth where we have probably a positive connotation with World War II. And the other thing about World War II was that and then I'll get on with the game. World War II transformed everyday life in fundamental ways. It was like a time out of time, where the rules of everyday life were suspended for the duration of the war. For the duration of the war, women could work in factories. That would come to an end after the war was over. For the duration of the war, the government decided what you could eat and what you couldn't eat, and what the prices of those products would be. That would come to an end. There was a whole set of rules and guidelines for living your life during the war that wouldn't exist before and wouldn't exist after. And I think there's a fascination with that, and it certainly helps with creating trivia questions. It's a really easy thing to create trivia questions having to do with World War I, and World War II, and I'm going to start simply with this. What are the code names of the U.S. sector beaches for D-Day? Omaha and Utah. Exactly. Omaha Beach and Utah Beach. These were the westernmost beaches of Normandy, where the American sector, the Americans were assigned on D-Day, the invasion of Normandy. There were 3 other beaches, however, and they were British and Canadian. What were their names?
Gold, Sword, and Juno.
Gold, Sword, and Juno. That's really good.
Wow.
You guys are good. Yes, Gold and Sword were the British beaches, and then Canada got Juno. Does anybody know the original name for Juno? How did you know that? Jelly. Oh, did I say that? Oh, you cheated. Already you cheated. I shouldn't have put that up there.
What's the answer?
Jelly.
Jelly.
The original code name for the Canadian invasion beach on D-Day was Jelly Beach. Jelly, sword, gold. They were all named after fish. And Winston Churchill himself saw that and thought, ugh, there are going to be Canadian boys going to die on that beach. I don't want them dying on Jelly Beach. Let's rename it Juno. And that's why it was renamed Juno kind of at the last minute. Okay, I hope you've heard of this story. Why did Allied war planners become alarmed when they read the London Daily Telegraph in the month before D-Day? Crossword puzzle. Who said that? You cheated because you were alive in World War II. That is absolutely, if this thing were wireless, I would come around and ask you what you know about this story. It's absolutely true, and I find it totally fascinating. For a MI5 British intelligence agent on May 2nd, 1944, was doing the London Daily Telegraph crossword puzzle, and something caught his notice. It was 17 across, and the hint was one of the United States, Utah. Not a common word in Great Britain in 1944. It caught his interest, it caught his attention. This is on May 2nd, and he went back and found in previous crosswords in April, there were other code names related to the Normandy invasion that had been used. They were Juno was an answer, gold was an answer, sword was an answer. So he started looking into the crossword puzzle, and he noticed then on the May 22nd, Red Indian on the Missouri, Omaha. And he was convinced that there was something going on. He found the man who created the crossword puzzle, and he had been creating the London Daily Telegraph crossword puzzle since 1925. He would go on to do the crossword puzzle till 1961. His name was Leonard Daw. I think he did 10,000 of them in his career. He was a World War I vet. And as the month wore on, more and more rare code names related to the Normandy invasion appeared in Leonard Daw's London Daily Telegraph crossword puzzle. May 27th, some bigwig like this has stolen it, some of it at times. Overlord, bigwig. 11 across on May 30th. This bush is the center of nursery revolutions. Mulberry. Mulberry was a code word for the floating harbors at the Normandy invasion. Overlord was the code name for the whole operation of the Normandy invasion. This was really alarming. And on June 1st, Britannia and he hold the same thing, Neptune. And that's the, Britannia and he hold the same thing. Neptune was the code name for the Navy operation on D-Day. So on May 30th, the MI5 paid Leonard Daw in his a visit. Daw was a teacher at a private school in Surrey, south of London. And Daw, unfortunately, Daw was a World War I vet. He responded to the initial interrogation kind of arrogantly. Like, I'm allowed to use whatever words I want. You know, what are you hassling me for? So the MI5 took him into custody and kept him for 5 days. They didn't want him releasing any more information until after the operation, after the initial invasion was over. And they interrogated him. I mean, it wasn't, they didn't torture the poor guy, but man, life was really unpleasant for 4 or 5 days for Leonard Daw. They never, ever got to the bottom of this. Was he a spy? Was he trying to communicate to the Germans? Where did he get these code words? He would admit to nothing. So they let him go, and they chalked it up to coincidence. I remember very well reading, not very well, but I do remember at some point, like early in my high school years, reading a book, something like Great Coincidences of History, and this was in it. Just like, what are the odds that this, it turns out it was not a coincidence. In the 1990s, one of his students came forward, and I think it was for the 50th anniversary of D-Day, and he said, like, I'll tell you what really happened. And it was this. The students that Daw taught, they spent their free time with the American GIs, mainly officers, in camp who were planning the D-Day invasion near Southampton, England. And they said, we weren't hanging out with like privates and sergeants. We were hanging out with the older guys, the officers, who had families, and they really missed their families. He said they were overwhelmingly homesick. And so they liked us kids being around. We fixed up their rooms. We ran errands for them. We were with them all the time, and we heard them talk about this invasion. We knew the invasion was coming. He said, as a 12-year-old kid, I knew that the code word for the Normandy invasion was Overlord. I knew that. I didn't know where it was going to be. I didn't know that Normandy would be the location, but I knew we were all familiar with these words. We heard these words a lot. And he said that, our fascination with the words and with these men who said them, coupled with our fierce competitiveness in feeding Leonard Daw new words for his crossword puzzle, led to the transfer of these words into the puzzle. Leonard Daw, he would not admit this to the MI5, he spent every week, he would get his kids together and say, give me words. Give me unusual words. And they would come out with Omaha, Utah, Mulberry, Overlord, Neptune, Juno. He had no idea, Leonard Daw had no idea where they were from, but he would write them down and use them in the crossword puzzles. This student, whose name was Ronald French, said after Leonard Daw got released by MI5, he called the students together and said, where did you get those words? And we admitted that we got them from the GIs, and we showed them our notebooks, because we always wrote down our words that we heard them say. And he said, burn those notebooks. Never, ever, ever talk about this even to your parents. He said, so we did. We burned our notebooks. We never spoke about it until 1994 when he came forward and shared the story. I think it's just a remarkable, wonderful story. Okay. Number 4. The name of the B-29 bomber that dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima was the Enola Gay. What was the name of the plane that dropped the second bomb on Nagasaki?
Little boy.
No, Little Boy is the name of the bomb.
Boxcar.
Oh.
Boxcar. Yes, Boxcar. And Boxcar was named after the pilot who named the ship called Bach, Frederick Bach. It did so happen that Frederick Bach did not, however, pilot the plane when it dropped the bomb on Nagasaki. Instead, and I don't know why, but Frederick Bach was not flying Boxcar when the bomb was dropped over Nagasaki. Instead, he was flying the observation plane, the great artiste, I think, maybe that took pictures, and another pilot, Charles Sweeney, was flying Boxcar when it dropped Nagasaki. Does anybody know what the first target was? Nagasaki was not the original target. Yeah. Kokura Arsenal? I think it was. And I think, from my memory of this mission, this mission, this second mission over Nagasaki, should be written about a little bit more than it is, because it was pretty hazardous. And it was hazardous because there was a fuel leak, and they were spending too much time in the air. They were getting shot at. They were waiting for the air to clear around the Kokura Arsenal previous firebombing had created this cloud and smoke so that the target was obscured. They couldn't do a visual drop on Kikura Arsenal. They kept on going around and around, waiting for it to clear. That gave the Japanese time. They were starting to send up fighters. Japanese barely had any fighters left. But what they had, they started to send up and started getting hazardous. Oh my gosh, if we get shot down with this atomic bomb, who knows what could happen? So instead they flew to Nagasaki, which was also clouded over, but at the last minute they got just a little opening in the clouds and dropped it on the wrong location in Nagasaki, and that was the second bomb dropped, killing I think 35,000 people. Immediately, if they had dropped it on the correct target, it probably would have killed 80,000 people immediately. All right. Question 5. Why was gasoline rationed in World War II?
Save the rubber tires.
Wow, you are smart. Gold star for your forehead. That is right. It was not because of shortage of oil or a shortage of gasoline. The U.S. had tons of gasoline. At the time, I think the U.S. supplied 80% of the world's oil. And I think the theory was, the understanding was that the U.S. probably held about half of the world's available oil supply. So oil was not a problem. Gasoline was not a problem. The problem was rubber. Rubber was a huge critical shortage. There were a lot of critical material shortages they were called during World War II. There was a shortage of tin, and that was serious. Everything was short. There was a shortage of cotton, but the most critical shortage of all was the rubber shortage. And that was because 90% of the world's rubber was grown. Rubber comes from a plant. My students always thought that was really funny. They didn't know it. Rubber came from a plant called a rubber tree, which is native to South America. And South America, the Europeans discovered, this is what happens to me, Marlene. I start to digress on these other interesting subjects, like what the Europeans discovered rubber in South America and were fascinated by it. They thought this is the coolest stuff. They brought it back to Europe. Nobody could figure out what to do with it. Everybody agreed that it was great. But the only use that was discovered, and it was discovered by the English, was to rub out pencil marks, which is why it was called rubber. But that was the only use, and for like generations that was the only use for it, until automobiles came around and pneumatic tires, and then that was a whole, rubber suddenly was a critical material for the world. Southeast Asia got into the rubber growing game because rubber needs a subtropical environment with lots of rain and never freezes. And so Southeast Asia, French Indochina, Malaysia, that was a good place to grow rubber. It outcompeted Brazilian rubber. And so the Brazilian rubber plantations were kaput in 1940. 90% of all the rubber supplying the world came from French Indochina, Vietnam, and British Malaysia, which the Japanese took over in 1941. So that meant the world no longer had a supply of rubber. The US barely had any strategic reserves of rubber, and we were big drivers. And so that meant that the US did not have enough rubber for the war effort. And if we were going to fight this war, we were going to need a lot of rubber. You know, a ship would take 75 tons of rubber. A B-17, half a ton of rubber. A GI would take 50 pounds of rubber. I mean, this was, and again, the issue is that the war is not being fought here. So we have to get everything to where the war is being fought, and we need rubber to do that. So if we didn't have the rubber, we were not going to be able to participate in the war. So the very first restriction that came after Pearl Harbor came on January 1st, 1942, when it was announced that nobody could ever buy tires for the duration of the war. Tires were banned, and that people were going to come around collecting everything rubber that you had in the house. Hoses, welcome mats, you name it, in an effort to recycle it. Gasoline, it was quickly determined by Harold Ickes, who was the Secretary of the Interior, that the biggest use of rubber in the country was automobile use. We ran through a lot of tires. So we had to restrict driving. How do you restrict driving? You impose a gasoline ration. FDR hated the idea. He said, and I quote, "How am I going to tell a guy in Texas living next to an oil derrick that we're rationing oil in this country?" And that was the problem. And that's why the gasoline rationing was delayed until like the fall of 1942. It really should have been imposed earlier, especially because most of the oil that we got was transferred to refineries in New Jersey, and it came from the Gulf of Mexico. And this route, oil tankers with 70,000 barrels of oil would transfer the oil from the Gulf of Mexico to refineries in New Jersey, and these tankers were being sunk at enormous rates, and I mean, hundreds a year. And so oil truly was not getting to New Jersey, couldn't be refined. That problem would eventually be solved with a pipeline that would be built called the Big Inch, that would start in Louisiana and would end in New Jersey. But that was long into the future. The whole story of oil and rubber in World War II and the strategic importance of both is a great, great story. All right. Question 6. Oh, here's another great story. A really great story, I think. Who was the first major Hollywood movie star to serve in the military in World War II? Jimmy Stewart. Yes, excellent. Thank you. Jimmy Stewart. What a story. I mean, really, what a story. Fascinating and inspiring and troubling all together. Jimmy Stewart. You all know where he's from, right? Indiana. His parents, his father owned the Stewart hardware store in Indiana. He grew up in the business. He went to Princeton as an undergraduate, majored in architecture, couldn't find any jobs as an architect during the Great Depression, also did some acting in Princeton. So he went to New York City, and who did he meet there? This is like 1932. Henry Fonda. And who else? Somebody else. And they started acting, kind of, small time, and they got bigger and bigger and more successful. Eventually, Henry Fonda, I think, moved first to Los Angeles to get into the Hollywood business after some stage acting. Jimmy Stewart followed him out there. Stewart started to get roles. He started to get good paychecks. And with his first big paycheck in 1936, he took flying lessons. All he ever wanted to do was to fly airplanes, really. If he had his druthers, he would never have gone into acting. He would have been a pilot. So he learned how to fly an airplane. And then when his second big paycheck came around, he bought an airplane. And he spent every free moment when he wasn't working, flying this airplane. He became really, really good at it. This is in the late 30s. He flew once from Indiana, PA, to Hollywood, alone, navigating by railroad tracks. He was a really, really accomplished pilot, and he was very much a perfectionist personality, which would plague him. He wanted desperately to become a pilot in the Army Air Corps. And he wanted this because both his grandfathers, whom he knew, were Civil War veterans, and his father, whom he was very close to, was a World War I veteran. And he felt he wanted to serve. I mean, this was a really deep, passionate need that he had to fill, was to serve in the military, and he thought he would serve as a pilot. He was drafted, finally, in the 1940 draft, the first peacetime draft. That's the one that was for, you had to serve for 1 year. Goodbye, dear, I'll be home in a year, right? He gets drafted, he gets inducted, he gets his physical. He's rejected because he's underweight. He's 6'3", 145 pounds. He has to go to a doctor to get a special dispensation that allows him in the Army. He joins the Army, he starts out as a private, makes his way to corporal, he gets his, he's a college graduate, so he gets a commission as second lieutenant. He's immediately identified as an expert flyer, and the Army decides, Pearl Harbor happens, and the Army decides, well, he'll be perfect either as an instructor, because he's so good, or probably as, in publicity. We'll feature him in movies and newsreels and stuff like that. And he's put on this little domestic circuit, and he's furious at that, because all he wants is to fight in the war. So he demands, I gotta be sent to war. Well, he gets sent. He becomes a squadron commander in the 8th Air Force in England, and he starts flying missions. And he's a really good squadron commander. I mean, he has great command presence, which is rare and unusual. His first mission was over Kiel submarine pens in northern Germany, and all he received was anti-aircraft fire. There were no enemy aircraft fighters around. He returns thinking, this isn't going to be so bad. And then he goes on a second mission, and it's terrible. It's harrowing. And he's a squadron commander, meaning he's in charge of 12 airplanes that are all flying in tight formation to a single target. He makes the decisions. He makes sure that they're all flying in the right formation from the moment they take off to the moment they return. And this is so harrowing. You've probably known that a lot of the casualties from World War II in these bombing missions came not from the enemy, it came from forming up. Even before they left England. You'd have 1,000 airplanes in East Anglia, 1,000 airplanes taking off at the same time. You would be given very strict directions. Head to this heading for 45 seconds, and then turn to this heading. If you turned at 47 seconds, you'd collide with another airplane and 20 people would die. I mean, this is how precise this had to be. And Jimmy Stewart was the one who, for a while, first as squadron commander, then as wing commander, he was a group commander. He was doing this with large 60 airplanes at a time. And they would fly to the mission and then return. And what really got to him was it never went perfectly. He was a perfectionist. And these missions did not go perfectly. They would leave with 12 planes, and 8 would come back.
Wow.
And he had to live with that. And he knew that some of the decisions he made probably led to 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 planes not coming back. And that really weighed on him. The mission that changed him permanently was, from what I remember the date because it was a single week in February 1943 called the Big Week or Big Week. This was the largest bombing run against Germany of the war. And it was 1 week in February where the U.S. Army Air Corps decided it was going to take out the entire German aircraft industry by bombing factories. And it was massive. And Jimmy Stewart flew those. And on February 24th, he flew one of these missions. He was in one of these command aircraft, and an anti-aircraft shell shot right through his plane, right between his feet, and left a hole in the floor of the plane so that his bag, his duffel with maps and information, actually vibrated and went through the hole and dropped below. It was, 40 degrees below zero. He makes it back, and everybody said he was never the same after that, that something got to him. This whole story was not well known until this man wrote a book about it, Robert Mattson. I read it with some skepticism, because Robert Mattson, how do I say this? He's a good writer, but he writes like Hollywood biographies. You know what I mean? Like junky stuff. He reveals like who has affairs with whom, that kind of thing. I was stunned by this book. This guy, he's not only a wonderful writer, but man, did he do his homework on what it was like to fly these missions in World War II. I don't know if there's a much better book that gives you a sense of what flying these bombing missions in World War II was like. Robert Mattson, Mission. I highly recommend it. And what makes it even better is Robert Mattson lives in Bethel Park. I got to know him. And I said, like, hey, I didn't want to read your book, but man, you're really good. And it tells the story of Jimmy Stewart beautifully. And he said this, he said he knew the Jimmy Stewart story, but he said you couldn't write a book about it because Jimmy Stewart never talked about the war, ever. No interviews about it. He would not answer questions about it. He never talked about it. And then somebody told him, well, you don't need to talk to him because there are government records on him. And he went and did the research at the National Archives, and he discovered there was so much on every one of these missions because he was a wing commander, Stewart was. And he discovered something that nobody knew, which was after that February 24th, 1943 mission, Jimmy Stewart was effectively relieved from command. He had a psychological breakdown. He spent time in what was called the Flack House, which was a psychiatric hospital. And he would go back on missions again, but he spent most of his time on the ground directing these missions rather than in the air. And that for a long time, I think it just tortured Jimmy Stewart that he had to be removed from the air. Mattson publishes in the book these two photos taken 2 years apart. This is Stewart when he got his wings in 1942. This is him 2 years later after the Gotha mission, February 1943. Look how much he aged.
He aged 20-some years.
He aged 20-some years, yeah. And it was, the other thing Mattson did is he interviewed a lot of people who served with Stewart. And what they said about Stewart was this. They said, like, we forgot that he was a celebrity because he was such a demanding commander. He really had a great command presence, and he was very perfectionistic, and they said, and that was his downfall. He took responsibility for every mission. He couldn't laugh anything off. He couldn't take anything lightly. And they said that, we saw the guy age before our eyes. And towards the end of the war, Stewart started to relax. And he said, I can never act again. He had been a young leading man. He said, like, who's gonna cast this guy? He was pretty certain when he came home in 1945 that his acting career was over. In fact, he put most of his energy into founding an airline, which is Southwest Airlines. It was founded by Jimmy Stewart and Jimmy Stewart's agent. And that's how he thought he would do. He would stay in the military. He stayed in the Air Force. He stayed in the Air Force through the 1960s. He retired a brigadier general. And loved the Air Force, loved the military. And he didn't want to act for a couple reasons. He didn't think he could be hired. And he also said, like, there's just nothing that could ever compare to the experience of, flying in combat. He eventually was convinced by the director of It's a Wonderful Life, Frank Capra, right? Frank Capra, who was also in the war, and a new Stewart, to take this role in a movie that was not expected to be a hit, and it was not a hit when it came out. It was not popular, not a box office success at all, because he thought he could get Stewart back in the game. And Jimmy Stewart was a wreck during the filming of It's a Wonderful Life. He barely ate. He couldn't sleep. He was very much in the depths of his trauma. And it turned out two things. Number one, the trauma comes through in the scenes in It's a Wonderful Life. He didn't have to act too much. And number two, he would say later that acting in that movie helped him with his healing. It helped him, emoting the way he did. Who plays the old man, that old banker? Yes, Lionel Barrymore. Lionel Barrymore really was the shoulder that Jimmy Stewart cried on during the filming of that movie. So this is a wonder. And by the way, Jimmy Stewart would go to Vietnam. He would fly 2 missions in a B-52 in the Vietnam War. He loved the Air Force. It was by far the greatest thing he felt he ever did in his life. He didn't think the acting thing was that big a deal, but he thought his time in the Air Force was fantastic. And I just think it's a wonderful story. Number 7. What African-American officer who became famous after the war was court-martialed during World War II because he refused to sit in the back of an Army bus? Jackie Robinson, exactly, yes. Jackie Robinson was a high school super athlete, college super athlete. I think at UCLA, he was a star in football, baseball, track, basketball, and tennis. He was the best tennis player UCLA had. After he graduated, he went to Hawaii, because in Hawaii, they didn't have racial segregation in their sports leagues. So he could play semi-pro baseball and semi-pro football, which he did in Hawaii. Then the war happens, he gets drafted. He's sent to Fort Riley in Kansas, and because he's a college graduate, the Army, he's immediately eligible for, among the few black recruits eligible for OCS, for Officer Candidate School. He was supposed to be able to go to Officer Candidate School, but his application for OCS got lost. And there's a lot of speculation, it's not really speculation, it's more fact, that Army brass didn't want him in OCS because he had a reputation for being kind of defiant, and he had a reputation for this was how it was put, for being impatient with racism. He did not put up with the kind of indignities that most black people did in the 1940s. He was a troublemaker. So he was not at first admitted to OCS until a friend of his who was also at Fort Riley, Joe Louis, intervened, the heavyweight champion, got Jackie Robinson into OCS. He became an officer, and he became a member of the 761st Tank Battalion, an all-black tank battalion that would go to serve in Europe. Became very famous and celebrated in the Battle of the Bulge. He became an officer in the 761st. He was about to be shipped over to Europe, and then one day at Fort Hood, he got on an Army bus, which were not segregated. The bus driver just told him to sit in the back, and so he sat in the front seat. And wouldn't you know, he got arrested for it. And he started complaining and said, what are you talking? There's not segregation on Army buses. and he was then, I think the charge was insubordination, I think public intoxication, he wasn't a drinker, and it was a whole story about how he eventually gets court-martialed, gets sent to a court-martial, tried, and acquitted by 9 white officers who find him not guilty. He does eventually get discharged from the army before the war is over, and never gets sent to Europe. And that really bothered him the rest of his life, that he did not serve in combat, and he felt that he had been kind of shortchanged the honor of serving his country in Europe because of the color of his skin. Okay, question number 8. During the Battle of the Bulge, General Omar Bradley was detained for giving the wrong answer to this checkpoint question. What is the capital of Illinois? Springfield. Do you know that that's what he answered? Okay, Battle of the Bulge. The Germans overrun the American positions and the British positions along a thin, weak line in Luxembourg and Belgium. And the Germans start to play this trick where they capture some Americans, take their uniforms, and then the Germans infiltrate the American lines wearing American uniforms. So security became really tight in the US Army during the Bulge, to the point where anytime you wanted to get in to an American encampment, you had to know the password, you had to answer the questions. So some private stops Omar Bradley and gives him 3 questions that he has to answer in order to get into the camp. The first is, what is the capital of Illinois? Bradley says, Springfield. The private says, no, it's Chicago. The second question that the private asked him was, where is the guard on the line of scrimmage? He answered that correctly, between the center and the tackle. And then the third question, which Bradley could not answer correctly, was, who is Betty Grable's husband? He didn't know. It was Harry James. And so Omar Bradley was detained for a time for not being able to answer these questions. All right. Here's an easy one. What determined the width of a modern American battleship? Only a Navy vet can answer. Panama Canal. 110 feet wide. They built battleships 108 feet wide. That's cutting it pretty close. All right, Smarty, Navy vets. What determined the height of a battleship? The bridge? I don't think it was the Golden Gate Bridge. I think it was, yes, the mast of the, I think it was to get under the bridges coming from the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So Brooklyn Bridge.
Bonus.
Is that a bonus?
Yes.
Yeah. Keep in mind, not everything I tell you is true. All right, how about this? Who is this person? Mildred Gillers, congratulations. What is she otherwise known as? Axis Sally, you got it. That's exactly it. This was Axis Sally. You never heard of Axis Sally? Axis Sally. Axis Sally was a German, an American, who had a show in Germany called the Home Sweet Home Hour. And she had a show that was broadcast from Berlin on radio, directed eventually toward American GIs, trying to get them to surrender, to give up, to hurt morale. It started out kind of innocuously. She was a real draw, and you would wonder, why would American GIs even listen to her? Because she played the best music. Every World War II vet I ever interviewed who was in Europe said, oh yeah, we always listen to Axis Sally, because she played the best music, because Armed Forces Radio would not play like the latest, swing hits. So she played them, she had this captive audience, and then she would convince them, at first gently, why don't you give up? Why your girlfriend misses you, your wife is probably cheating on you, that kind of thing. And then after like 1943 or so, she turns really dark and super anti-Semitic. She said, the Jews want you here. The Jews are the ones who are behind Roosevelt and Churchill. And then started taunting. This is a real turning point that a lot of GIs remember. She started naming individual American soldiers, where they were, what units they were in, and we're coming for you. She got this information by circulating in hospitals among American POWs, impersonating a Red Cross person, got all their information, and then she would broadcast the information back home for the families in America. I just talked to your son and he regrets ever getting on that ship and coming here. That kind of thing. It got really, really bad. To the point where she became public enemy probably number 2 or 3 after the war was over. There was a mad hunt to find her. The American Attorney General wanted to find her to try her for treason. And it took over a year to find her, but they did find her. She was selling used furniture in a German city. She was dragged back to the US, placed on trial, 8 or 9 counts of treason, acquitted of all of them except one. She was sentenced, I think, to 20 years in prison, ended up serving 10, was released in 1961, and became a nun. Pretty much a nun. She lived in a Catholic convent. She also finished her degree at Ohio Wesleyan. She was from Conneaut, Ohio. She was from Conneaut, Ohio. She had gone off to New York to be an actress, went to Europe to be a model and an actress, wound up in Germany when the war broke out, and got this job on radio, and kind of fell into this role of Access Sally. There was another woman who was also called Access. She would eventually die in the late 1980s, and I think she's buried in an unmarked grave near Conneaut. She went back and finally got her degree. She was a student at Ohio Wesleyan University in the 1970s. Bizarre. Can you imagine having her in class? This was also Access Sally. She was the Italian Access Sally, Rita Zucca. Her family owned a well-known restaurant, Zucca's Italian Garden in Brooklyn, or near Rockefeller Center in Manhattan. And she went back to visit family, got stuck in Italy, got hired then to work on the radio, renounced her U.S. citizenship, and performed the same function as Access Sally, except from Rome. She was also captured, and she couldn't be tried because she wasn't an American citizen, so she couldn't be tried for treason. So the Italians tried her and found her guilty, and she did some time in an Italian prison. This is Tokyo Rose. What a sad story this is, and a real miscarriage of justice. Her name was Eva Taguri. She grew up in Los Angeles. She was American. She was Christian. She was Methodist. She voted in the 1940 election for Wendell Willkie. And she went in 1941 back to Japan to visit family, got stuck there when Pearl Harbor happened. And she was forced to work at a radio station. And her job, this is a little strange. Her job at the radio station was to work with the POWs. There were Australian, British, and American POWs who were forced to do radio shows in Tokyo, saying how, they regret ever fighting the war, they had to say propaganda. Eva was there to support them. She would end up smuggling food. These prisoners would go back to POW camps she made sure that they went back with food. Eventually, they put her behind the microphone, and she never called herself Tokyo Rose, she called herself Orphan Annie. And she said, I'm an orphan just like you are, I'm lonely just like you are. She never really broadcast anti-American stuff. She supported American POWs over the course of the war. But after the war, she was arrested and tried for treason, and she was found guilty, which was a big miscarriage of justice. It turns out 2 of the witnesses who testified against her were paid to give false testimony, and she was eventually released and pardoned. It was the last pardon that Gerald Ford ever gave in 1977. And I love the fact that the World War II veterans group that built the memorial in Washington, D.C., one of their last acts was to honor Eva Toguri as an honorary World War II veteran for how she served POWs in Japan. She died finally in 2006. All right, before we end, one more story. Who's this guy? I know his name is Hiro Onoda.
He was the last
Here we go.
Japanese combatant. He was found in the jungle.
That's exactly it. He was the last Japanese soldier to surrender after World War II. He was trained as an intelligence officer. He was sent to the Philippines in 1944. It was invaded, I think, in February 1945. He escaped capture, he and his little team of 4, and refused to surrender. One of his team of 4 eventually did surrender. The other 2 members were eventually killed because they kept fighting. Even after the war ended in August 1945, they kept fighting. They fought through 1946, 1947. Now, they did notice that there were no Americans around. But they continued to blow up bridges, assassinate village mayors in the Philippines. They would steal and poison food supplies and water supplies. They did what they were ordered to do. And he was told, don't kill yourself and don't surrender. Fight until we tell you to stop. And he was never told to stop. Leaflets were dropped telling him that the war was over. He thought they were fake. So he kept on fighting. Eventually, by the early 1950s, the other 2 guys with him had died. He probably killed 30 Filipinos over the course of the next 29 years. And he never would have given up, except for this guy, Nuro Suzuki, who was a eccentric hippie, called the hippie boy. In 1974, he decided, he had been spotted. Onoda had been spotted. And they knew that there was a Japanese out there still fighting the war. And this crazy kid decides he's going to go and find him. And he did. He went out into the jungle. Onoda raised his rifle, almost shot Nurio, but Nurio spoke to him and said, the war is over, you're a hero back home, we want you to come back home. And for some reason, Onoda did not shoot him and said, look, if you find my commander, gave him the name, and my commander sends me a written order, I will surrender. Suzuki went back to Japan, found his commander running a bookstore, said, could you write an order ordering him back home, and delivered it back to him, and he did surrender. He surrendered in 1974. It was very well known. This guy, if you think about it, he was a murderer. He had murdered 30 people, but he was treated very much like a hero. Here is a film, just about a minute long, of his return home to Japan. It was a massive story, in 1974. That's his mother.
Oh, my.
He was considered a hero. There he is. He was owed a lot of back pay by the Army. He refused to take it. Donors volunteered to pay it. He donated all the money back to veteran causes. He arrives back home in Japan, and he said, the first thing I noticed was how short the skirts were. When he left Japan, Japan was a country made of wooden houses, and now there were skyscrapers. The emperor was worshipped as a god, and now he was just like any other person. He didn't like it. He didn't like it at all. He was starting to read the news. He read the story of a child, a teenager who killed his parents. That's where we're becoming like the West. People wanted him to run for, that's his father, that's his mother, seeing him for the first time.
She's following you now.
Yeah. He was absolutely feted as a hero. He wrote a memoir, which is really good, called No Surrender. And in the book, it's good because it does detail, in great detail, how he survived. When he was found, he still had 500 rounds of ammunition and like 13 hand grenades in working order. He was a real survival expert. And he was just celebrated as like, a representative of the old Japan, but he hated the new Japan. And so he moved to Brazil because he couldn't handle modern Japan. And he died saying, like, the only way that we're going to come back is to rebuild the old empire. So he was an unrepentant Japanese fascist, I would say, but another fascinating story. All right, I'm going to come back a month, 4 weeks from today plus one. So that'll be February 5th, a Thursday. And I'm going to do part 2 of World War II trivia. I'll see you then.